Howdy, Taras here. Welcome to another episode of our running series, What is a Coral? A series where we try and chop up all the different general coral family types, just so when people walk in, it's a little bit more easy to digest and be like, oh, that's what I'm looking at, that's what I'm looking at. That way when you're talking to our staff or you want to look for something in particular, you have a little bit of more of a base plate of where to start off. Today we're going to be talking about a relatively hardy, but I think a pretty exciting coral family. It's the Dendrophylliidae, the sun corals, but it also contains the Duncan samia, the Duncans, and I think that they're quite exciting. In the wild anyway, they are found radiating around coral reefs. Broad majority of this family in the wild is aphotosynthetic, living at depths upwards of 100 feet, but they are all very united because they have these giant charismatic tentacles, even if they're photosynthetic or not, are used to collect all this detritus, pelagic bacteria, algae, even larger prey items such as small baby krill, copepods, etc., and they are able to consume them. So Duncans are really cool because not only do they have a fairly unique shape and presence in the aquarium, but they are low light lovers, which means this is a coral that can, will, and should be put in your sand bed. Not only is that a good way to succeed with them, but it's a nice way to kind of give your sand bed a little bit of presence, but they certainly do benefit from a good deal of flow because they are pretty voracious eaters of phytoplankton and smaller to moderate sized zooplankton. So in the wild, these guys, like I said, radiate around main coral reefs. They'll be found in little clusters along the rocky bottoms. For more information on how to take care of them and personal recommendations, let's check in with Eli in the trenches.
Hey there, Eli again to give you an up-close look at the Dendrophylliidae, in specific the Duncans that Taras was just talking about. These are one of my favorite beginner LPS corals. They tend to do very well in a wide variety of aquariums. As Taras was just mentioning, Duncans tend to prefer lower light, low to moderate light, so keeping them lower in the tank, maybe on the sand bed or on a very lower piece of rockwork, is the best option for them. They do enjoy a little bit of flow, maybe a moderate to low level of flow because these polyps are so large. And they're kind of designed to capture food particles. Having a decent amount of flow in the tank will help these to keep these fed throughout the day. On that note, it is also a good idea to feed these corals maybe once or twice a week. You usually will see better growth results out of these corals. They really do enjoy a feeding, whether you just feed them with mysis shrimp when you're feeding the tank, or if you go out of your way with something like Coral Max to feed the polyps directly. There's a couple different growth forms with the Duncan corals. Some of them form more of a branching colony, which might be easier to frag down the road, a little bit easier to cut into smaller pieces, whereas some of them grow more of a mounding shape. They grow a little more tight together and they're not so easy to cut because they form such a dense skeleton. But you will run into both types of these growth forms in the hobby. It's not always the easiest to tell when it's a smaller frag, what one you're going to end up with. As Taras mentioned earlier too, this family does include some of the more difficult corals, being dendro corals, sun corals. A lot of these corals are not photosynthetic, so they tend to be a little more of the expert only corals, but they can be a really interesting addition to your aquarium if you intend on spot feeding, target feeding, and maybe you want to fill in some lower light spots in your aquarium. Duncan coral makes a great addition to almost any aquarium. It's pretty easy going. One thing worth note is that it tends to be kind of a wimp in terms of corals. It doesn't have the best sting or the best chemical defenses. Placement of this coral can be kind of difficult. I would not recommend placing it next to anything else that has a decent sting, as the Duncans generally do not win the stinging match, so generally they want to be placed on their own in the aquarium. As always, if you guys have any questions, want to come in the shop and talk corals, or check us out on osachoice.com for all of your reef keeping needs.